Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our special lecture series, Modernism 1922-2022. This is the sixth lecture of the series and the third online lecture scheduled for our special lecture series. Today is the 19th of December 2022, and we are graced by the presence of Dr. Dipanjan Maitra, who has joined us all the way from Georgia, Atlanta. So I would now request my colleague Rishi Pal to kindly introduce the speaker for the day. And before he does so, may I mention that this is not my first time listening to Dr. Moitra. I have listened to him before. And those of you who have joined here today, I can assure you, you are in for a very, very exciting ride. So over to you, Rishi Raj.
Thank you very much, Aritra. Yes, of course. Dipanjan is very dear to us, and I'll be introducing my speaker. Hello, everyone. Very warm welcome to this online session. This is a part of the Modernism lecture series we are conducting at Center for Study, Distance Education and Online Education, Rabindra Bharati University. So Dipanjan Maitra completed his PhD in English at State University of New York at Buffalo in 2022. He was formerly an advanced PhD fellow at Humanities Institute uh, at Buffalo. His, his dissertation entitled Built with Glue and Clippings, Modernist Collaboration and the Press Cutting Bureau explored the role of press-cutting agencies in furthering the careers of modernists like Gertrude Stein, James Joyce, Nancy Cunard, while also acting as a surveillance tool in the hand of larger institutions such as the British Empire. He has presented academic papers on modernism, genetic criticism, and psychoanalysis at international conferences in India, US, and Europe. His academic articles have appeared in Modernism, Modernity Print Plus, James Joyce Quarterly, Genetics Joyce Studies in Italy, and other peer-reviewed journals. He was recently awarded a dissertation a fellowship by Harry Ransom Center, University of Texas at Austin, and a research fellowship by the Society for the History of Authorship, Reading and Publishing, SHARP, for his dissertation project. Dr. Dipanjan Maitra is currently Mariel N. Britton, a postdoctoral fellow, School of Literature, Media and Communication, Georgia Institute of Technology, Georgia Tech, Atlanta. It's a pleasure and honor to have Dr. Maitra with us tonight. Over to you, Dr. Maitra.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible. Thank you so much, Rishi Raj and Aritra, for your kind introductions. Uh, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm really fascinated by the fact that you kind of managed to put this out, this wonderful lecture series. And I'm really happy to be part of this because I know some of the speakers, and it's really an honor to be here. So I hope to speak for about maybe half an hour, 40 minutes at the most. And then if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. So my paper will talk about two modernist figures, someone, one who is like canonical, widely canonical, acknowledged, James Joyce, and whose work, Ulysses, is being celebrated this year, obviously, for its 100th anniversary. And the other figure is Nancy Cunard, who was a British heiress and a political activist herself, a publisher, and also a poet, but whose work probably isn't as well known as it should be. I mean, maybe beyond a certain circle. My paper basically deals with their approach to media culture. In the 1920s and 1930s, I will be looking at a few examples and try and maybe contrast some of their approaches. But the idea is to sort of look at how they kind of grasped or exploited the media landscape of their times, and how they use that to promote their cause. In Joyce's case, the the cause, if it is a cause, it was the cause of maybe promoting Ulysses in some ways. And Joyce was pretty active on that, personally intervening in this process fairly early, like in around 1920. Whereas for Nancy Cunard, who's a political activist in some ways, an anti-racist activist, more specifically, her approach is obviously different. Her agenda is different. She's looking at much more complex political questions. She herself is a kind of complex figure. And she uses media forms. She creates certain things, documents, ephemeral documents, to promote this cause. So obviously the agendas are different, but what I'm interested in is the way they kind of handle media and so on. So what I'm going to speak about today, I mean, the stuff is fairly new in the sense that there isn't a whole lot of work on some of these questions. It's also new for me because I haven't really addressed these questions publicly. Some of this is really part of my dissertation. So if at any point this seems like weird, obscure, please feel happy to interrupt. I'd be happy to explain further. All right, so here goes. So I would like to share my screen. If let me see.
Yeah, sure, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, just give me a moment. Sorry about that. Right. Are you? So hopefully you're able to see the PowerPoint. Right.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Perfect. All right. Okay. So thank you once again, Aritra and Rishiraj, for organizing this wonderful series of lectures celebrating modernism's Annus Mirabilis. Of course, we are seeing similar endeavors around the world this year, and I have been obviously part of some of this myself. While the cultural significance of 1922 is always well taken, there is always, of course, that danger of fetishizing a single year and celebrating happenstance, sometimes even accidents, or events without focusing too much on the mechanisms that made these events possible. I mean, after all, a similar case can be made about, for example, the year 1913, the year that Jean-Michel Rabate has called the cradle of modernism. The last year of innocence before the Great War, 1913, year of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, the year of Rabindranath Tagore's Nobel Prize, Marinetti's Futurist Manifesto, Proust's Swan's Way, and so on. So therefore, there is always that danger of isolating one year and hailing it as the cornerstone of any artistic or cultural movement. This is why I appreciate how the title of this series of talks also makes the case for a beyond. Modernism 1922-2022, 100 years and beyond. I will be focusing on events that took shape both before and after 1922, and which will involve two key modernist figures, James Joyce and Nancy Cunard. Well, there have already been several talks on Joyce as part of this series, and justifiably so. I don't know if the name of Nancy Cunard, a British heiress, publisher, anti-racist activist, advocate for international communism even, has actually come up, as part of this series. Cunard was one of the great middle women, if I can call it that, intermediaries of modernism. I will be looking at, for tonight, I will be looking at the ways in which James Joyce and Cunard display their grasp of the media landscape of the 1920s and 1930s, respectively, to promote their widely divergent agendas. The first part of the talk will center on James Joyce and his personal interventions in the promotion of Ulysses in the early 1920s, and his meticulous selection and editing of press reviews to help augment the sales of Ulysses. The second half will focus on Nancy Cunard and the use of her formidable celebrity image to draw global attention to her cause. And for this, I will be focusing on one event, which is what's called the Scottsboro Boys Trial, which took place roughly around from 1931 to 1934. And I'll go into detail about that. I'll introduce some of these events in a sense. After all, 1922 holds a special place in modernist media studies as well. Not to be forgotten, this is because on 18th October 1922, the British Broadcasting Company, or the BBC, as it came to be known universally, was formed by a group of wireless manufacturers with a monopoly over broadcasting in the UK. Of course, as we know, the BBC was to change the media landscape of Britain, Britain's colonies, and soon of the world in the coming decades. It is with this view of a changing media stratosphere in the background that I want to talk about Joyce and Cunard today. I intend to show how both Joyce and Cunard anticipated the entertainment-driven news culture of today that we are all familiar with, especially in India, where boundaries between news events and entertainment become increasingly blurry. So I'll start with Joyce first. Despite his refusal to give interviews or celebrity lecture tours, James Joyce's interest in self-promotion is not a surprising fact. He is said to have confided to his aunt Josephine Murray, and this is according to Richard Ellman, I quote, "I want to be famous while I am alive." Interesting point. There are references to advertising throughout his works. As we all know, Leopold Bloom, Joyce's hero in Ulysses, is an advertisement canvasser for the Freeman's Journal. And Bloom in Ithaca famously wonders about the modern art of advertising. This is a pretty well quoted passage. I mean, it's very well known, but it's kind of interesting to in the context of Joyce's own motives and his own interests. And this is what Bloom is wondering aloud. This is part of the the narrative voice, of course, in Ithaca. And it's something like this. What also stimulated him in his cogitations? And the voice explains, the financial success achieved by Ephraim Marx and Charles A. James, the former by his one penny bazaar at 42 George's Street, South, the latter at his 6 one-penny shop and World's Fancy Fair and Waxwork exhibition at 30 Henry Street, admission 2 pence, children 1 pence, and the infinite possibilities, and this is the important point, and the infinite possibilities hitherto unexploited of the modern art of advertisement, if condensed in triliteral monoidal symbols, vertically of maximum visibility divined, horizontally of maximum legibility deciphered, and of magnetizing efficacy to arrest involuntary attention, to interest, to convince, to decide. So the fact that Bloom is interested in advertisement and these things that this has enormous possibilities is interesting, and it's been commented on a lot. It's interesting for Joyce because between 1920 and 1922, the years that saw Joyce finalizing the publication of Ulysses with the help of Sylvia Beach's Shakespeare and Company, Joyce would personally intervene in every aspect of the production of his book to make sure it drew attention in the press. And I think some of this has been addressed previously in the series because I know Pinakida spoke about the book covers, the covers of Ulysses. And so I'm glad that I'm speaking after Pinakida on the Ulysses book covers. And he might have mentioned to you how Joyce meticulously selected the color of the cover page of the first edition of Ulysses, the specific shade of sea blue, symbolizing the color of the Greek flag, and the white letters, the islands of Greece, and so on. John McCourt begins his recent book, Consuming Joyce, with the observation that Joyce shared Bloom's fascination with advertisement and the commerce of his books. James Joyce, like Leopold Bloom, was fascinated by advertising, sales, and consumption, and by the ways in which the attention of consumers was won and held. This was particularly true when it came to Ulysses. In fact, as we now know, Joyce took copious notes on advertising while writing Ulysses. And this is one source, which is Howard Bridgewater's Advertising, or the Art of Making. Yeah, so this is one of the main sources of Bridgewater's Advertising, or the Art of Making Known, 1909, 1910. Joyce took copious notes from this particular book, and we know this from various scholars have commented on this already. So one of the commonest ways of creating a buzz about a publication is by ensuring it gets reviewed by respected or maybe famous people, and then circulating blurbs from these reviews. Joyce took care of both personally. He was aware of the interest his book had generated even before its publication. He was claiming this fact as early as December 1920 to his patron, Harriet Weaver. I sent you on the article in the Dial. It is rather curious that I have already a fair collection of reviewers of an unpublished book. If Mr. Hupsch, who's Joyce's American publisher, decides to print it, possibly the series of reviews will not be discontinued, etc. So he was already aware, that reviews were important, and he was already collecting some of these reviews as far back as it's 1920. Joyce was referring to Evelyn Scott's review here in the Dial, called The Contemporary of the Future, published in the October 1920 issue of this journal. Joyce would include excerpts from Scott's piece in the advance press notices of Ulysses, prepared in 1921. In fact, we know that Joyce personally copied excerpts from Scott's review for insertion. These are my notes from Joyce's notes. I'm not allowed to show you the original because this is really unpublished and all of that. So this is Joyce's notes, where he's kind of personally copying down phrases from these reviews. And these phrases, words, which are kind of chosen with care, these went into the press notices that Joyce helped prepare to sort of advertise, his book, and also attract buyers. The one in the middle is, of course, the review from is from the review by Evelyn Scott in the Dial. Joyce's hand-copied notes from his reviewers, which would appear on the advance press notices and future notices almost verbatim, however, were all meticulous excerpts of choice phrases. By choice phrases, I mean phrases that usually draw attention and are often entertaining. In the beginning, when reviews were generally hostile, Joyce would convert his negative reviews to positive ones by deliberately concealing or obscuring many adverse remarks. While all literary blurbs are cherry pickings anyway, Joyce expertly converted some of his most hostile reviews into laudatory passages. This is an important distinction, I feel, in Joyce's case, because in later notices, he would be more adventurous and include even his hostile critics for negative publicity. I'm not going there, but I'll basically focus on the first half, which is when he's looking at generally hostile reviews and converting them into sort of more positive ones. But in these advance, initial notices for Ulysses at least, Joyce was careful to omit any references that would adversely affect his image or the reputation of the book. I will give a few examples here. For instance, the first excerpt from Ezra Pound in the original read something like this. You can see the press notice here and what Joyce has done, what Joyce has done. And this is the original. This is that Pound wrote. So as you can see, Pound says a lot of things and Joyce cherry picks only certain phrases. Joyce's elisions, the things that he deleted, are in red. So read in full, it will read something like his profoundest work, most significant. Exiles was a sidestep, necessary catharsis, clearance of mind from continental contemporary thought. Ulysses, obscure, even obscene, as life itself is obscene in places, but an impassioned meditation on life. He has done what Flaubert set out to do in Bouvard and Pécuchet, done it better, more succinct, and epitome.
So please ignore that.
And you can see what Joyce, has copied. Like, and Joyce says something like this. He excludes the word obscene, obscure, and what ultimately comes up in the advance notice is simply this. Mr. Ezra Pound says his profoundest work, an impassioned meditation on life. He has done what Flaubert set out to do in Bouvard and Pécuchet, done it better and more succinct. So just nice things and no references to obscurity or even obscenity. So Joyce not only elides the references to exiles, but also the more nuanced description of Ulysses as obscure, even obscene, as life itself is obscene in places. Instead, he retains the end of the sentence, an impassioned meditation on life. Joyce indulges in even more elaborate cherry picking with Richard Aldington's article, which appeared in the April 1921 just a second. Yes. Issue of the English Review. This is Richard Aldington in the English Review in April 1921. And it's called The Influence of Mr. James Joyce. Joyce's quotes from Aldington scarcely display Aldington's strong reservations against the potential influence of Joyce on contemporary writers, which he thought was closer to Dadaism and by extension to imbecility. So this is what Joyce quotes in his press notice. A most remarkable book, Bloom is a rags and tatters Hamlet, a proletarian leer, an astounding psychological document. Ulysses is more bitter, more sordid, more ferociously satirical than anything Mr. Joyce has yet written. A tremendous libel on humanity, which I at least am not clever enough to refute. This is what he quotes. In his review, however, in his original review, however, Aldington is careful to add rejoinders to almost every word of praise he has for Joyce. For example, the first sentence, a most remarkable book, is excerpted from page 338 of the review, where Aldington praises Joyce's aesthetics, but notes how he falls well short of documenting human life. And you can see the original here. That is my opinion of Mr. Joyce's Ulysses. From the point of view of art, there is some justification for Mr. Joyce. He has succeeded in writing a most remarkable book. But, and here's the juicy bit, but from the point of view of human life, I'm sure he's wrong. Joyce obviously, conveniently excludes that. Even the second sentence reads differently if read in its entirety. Aldington says, Bloom is a kind of rags and tatters Hamlet, a proletarian leer, and then mirroring life and showing it to be hideous. So Bloom might well be a proletarian leer and a rags and tatters Hamlet, but what he showcases, what he shows ultimately is ultimately hideous and maybe something to be avoided. Unsurprisingly, the final sentence of the quote is also a clever act. Aldington reiterates his initial jibe and calls Ulysses a libel against humanity. He expresses his disappointment at the sordid arena from which Joyce's characters find themselves unable to escape. And this is something we often hear critics, especially the early critics, say about Joyce. Even something like Dubliners has been described as a text where we see characters unable to escape. They're constantly caught up in their helplessness and so on. Clearly, I hope the wrong thing. And this is what he says. Ulysses is more bitter, more sordid, more ferociously satirical than anything Mr. Joyce has yet written. It is a tremendous libel on humanity, which I, at least, am not clever enough to refute. And then this is the rejoinder, but which I am convinced is a libel. And Joyce obviously leaves this out. Aldington, who was already writing about his experiences in the First World War, had reserved his most damning invectives against Joyce in previous paragraphs, comparing, I quote, the disgusting savagery, end quote, he had encountered in the trenches. He found Joyce's characters to be even more irredeemable. As a desperate remedy, he recommended Plato's therapy. He says, I quote, give him praise, that is, give Joyce praise, and anoint him with oil, and put a crown of purple wool on his head, and send him to the United States, end quote. The irony would not be lost on Joyceans today. The main reason Joyce took so much care to select and edit press reviews and create press notices is because of his conviction that influential reviews helped increase sales. In two back-to-back letters in March 1922, Joyce wrote to Robert McAlmon and Stanislaus Joyce, his brother, claiming how Cicely Huddleston's review in The Observer led to 136 and then 148 copies being ordered on the same day. He also noted the importance of adding the name and address of the bookseller in a review to bring about sales. And this is, he's referring to Arnold Bennett's article. I received Mr. Bennett's article and sent him a word of thanks. For the purposes of sales, his article is not very useful, as it does not give the name and address of the publisher. I always look for the first of all in an article, then at its length, and finally at its signature. End quote. Joyce would nevertheless add excerpts from Arnold Bennett's review in his press notices. What emerges from a letter like this is that he maintained rapport with his reviewers even after they had written their reviews. Like Bennett, he would personally write to Edmund Wilson to thank him for his 2 reviews of Ulysses. Your articles, he says, dear sir, your articles in the New Republic and Evening Sun about Ulysses have been read to me, and I desire to express my thanks for your very appreciative and painstaking criticism. This is Joyce to Edmund Wilson. And if you know about early Joyce criticism, you'd know that Edmund Wilson would go on to write influential reviews of Finnegan's Wake and would include Joyce in his modernist pantheon in Axel's Castle in 1931. What these examples showcase, therefore, is the relation between an experimental, still deemed obscure work of modernist fiction such as Ulysses and the literary marketplace. While Joyce resisted every effort to censor his work or appear in the public to speak, lecture, or give interviews, he did everything to publicize it from behind. In fact, he became his own publicist, an intermediary between his work and his reading public. So thus the press review and meticulously compiled press notice were his vehicles. His alertness to the age of mass media, celebrity culture, helped publicize Ulysses and was a crucial part of his literary production. And now I come to the second part of my talk. So while Joyce's primary vehicle for publicity in the 1920s was the review, the changing nature of mass media in the 1930s with the advent of celebrity culture, celebrity photography, one needed expertise in other forms of visual media to draw attention. My second example today is thus someone who was born a celebrity and whose life revolved around her celebrity image, Nancy Cunard. And this is how Nancy Cunard is being described very famously by Jane Marcus, pretty well known literary scholar. She was a living network, a one-woman permanent walking demonstration against racism and fascism, and a celebrant of Black culture in all its forms. She had a voice in shaping all the competing and conflicting discourses of modernism, but in their histories, there is only the marginal trace of a husky whisper, a smudge like a streak of coal across these hooded piercing eyes, remembered in a malicious footnote. I would say that, in 2022, this is far from the case. There are, more serious studies of Cunard's work, but she still, I would say, does not enjoy a lot of, I wouldn't say popularity, but any sense of, she's not renowned beyond a certain circle, if I can put it that way. So this was how Jane Marcus described Nancy Cunard in 1995. Cunard's reputation and her complex legacy as a powerful intermediary of modernism, publisher, journalist, socialite, have often hovered between two extremes. As an anti-racist activist, a fearless champion of anti-imperialist forces, an ardent sympathizer of communism, but also a hopelessly naive, well-meaning Miss Anne of Harlem, to quote Carla Kaplan, or as Laura Winkle terms it, I quote, a racial romantic, end quote. But Cunard was undoubtedly a star in the horizon of modernist culture. Daughter of Sir Bucky Cunard, heir to the Cunard shipping line, and Maud Burke, an American socialite, Cunard was born into immense wealth and cultural capital. Cunard, she divided her time between literary patronage and political activism. The latter found expression in her sympathy for international leftist causes and her anti-racist, anti-imperialist political journalism. She was at the center of a pre-war coterie of rich socialites in England, after which she became well known as muse, lover, and inspiration for as diverse a cast as Aldous Huxley, Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, Wyndham Lewis, Louis Aragon, and others. Samuel Beckett, who would serve as a compatriot at times, received his first validation as an author through Cunard, who had founded her own press, the Hours Press. This is the publication held by her lover, the jazz musician Henry Crowder. She published Beckett's first major literary work, Horoscope, in 1930. Her politics, which exploited her star image as a celebrity, host, and heiress, systematically explored what Jeremy Braddock has recently called her alertness to, and I quote, the transformation in the international media economy as presenting opportunities and crises for aesthetic modernism as well as for political action. End quote. This dizzying array of roles makes her an especially complex figure to comprehend and situate within the modernist milieu. But Cunard's diverse interests and advocacies probably found their fulfillment in the monumental Negro anthology, published in 1934, an almost 900-page anthology boasting a compilation of 150 authors on the contemporary situation of Black people around the world. So the anthology was fairly transnationalist, even internationalist in its ambition. It contained literary texts, history, anthropological studies of no less a figure than Zora Neale Hurston, political commentaries, her own political writings, and so on. It's just massively complex and encyclopedic work. I will be focusing today on one specific episode from her role as an anti-racist activist. The event was the infamous Scottsboro Boys Trial of the early 1930s, about which Cunard wrote in the Negro Anthology in a piece called Scottsboro and Other Scottsboros. The Scottsboro Boys incident took place on March 25th, 1931, in the town of Paint Rock, Alabama. Now, there's a complex sequence of events. I'm simplifying and just, again, cherry picking. So what happened was something like this. 9 African-American teenagers, Haywood Patterson, Andy Wright, Clarence Norris, Olin Montgomery, Ozzie Powell, Willie Robertson, Roy Wright, Charlie Weems, and Eugene Williams were riding a freight train in search of work in Memphis. They were falsely accused of raping 2 white women, Victoria Price and Ruby Bates, who were also riding the same train. The boys were booked at the county court in Scottsboro. They were found guilty and sentenced to death. The all-white, all-male jury in Alabama was also expected to uphold the sentence. In the days and months that followed, the 9 boys were repeatedly threatened with lynching. One of the defendants, Ruby Bates, eventually retracted her testimony and sided with the boys, and a countrywide outrage followed. Well, the 9 boys would ultimately be able to free themselves after extensive trials. By the time Cunard came to write Scottsboro and Other Scottsboros for the anthology on September 16, 1933, the boys were facing their 3rd trial, and the death penalties loomed large. While the piece would have its impact after publication, Cunard's personal activism, her celebrity status, helped popularize her cause far more than her writing could, probably. She converted this event into a media campaign. Her protest became a media campaign. What followed was a series of media trials. This is the backlash that she faced because of her activism. So it's a series of media trials, which are not unlike those we see regularly on TV channels today. Cunard, and I'm kind of, again, this is complex sequence of events. I'm narrating a few, just probably the more major events, to point out what happened after she, sided with the boys and was advocating their release, advocating for the release. Cunard reached New York in April 1932 to campaign against this unfair trial, and hell broke loose. She had by then publicly criticized her mother for her views on race. She was in an open relationship with the African-American musician Henry Crowder. And this meant that, the press smelled blood. Not only was she approached by 10 interviewers, but the American tabloids and their British counterparts came up with a new story that Cunard had been involved in an affair with like-minded leftist singer and actor Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson is probably not that unknown in India, in Bengal, probably. His songs are, have Bengali versions, famously Old Man River, sung by, Bhupen Hazarika. So he's a very well-known figure, even in his lifetime, obviously. And so the libel, so the accusation was, it was outlandishly false. Cunard utilized this sudden press notoriety in publicizing her cause, the defense of the Scottsboro Boys. So she used this publicity to advocate for her own cause. Cunard's archive at the Harry Ransom Center illustrates the dual nature of her celebrity status. They showcase the relentless hate mail that she received during this time, which was based on press reports, and also the massive chunk of publicity materials for the gala dinners, dances, and lectures she organized. I will be showing some of this hate mail, and it is offensive. But I would say that, what I found in the archive was whatever I'm showing now, soon. Next is probably the most innocent of the hate mails that she received. This is what I'm showing is actually just a photo. As you can see, it's a paper clipping, but it has this message scribbled on it. And she received similar things in her mailbox constantly. So her hate mails and the kind of this massive collection of ephemera that we have at the Ransom Center as part of her collection, they both showcase the power of mass media that Cunard was exploiting. As this particularly vicious photo commentary published in the Philadelphia Tribune on 5th May 1932, and no doubt reprinted in other dailies demonstrates, the white anxiety over miscegenation that was driving the Scottsboro trial could be directed to Cunard as well. The accompanying hate mail from this anonymous individual seems to designate both the bourgeois Cunard and her companion as equally vulgar. And you can see the message. The Negro, like the white petty bourgeoisie, are hopeless. What vulgarity, end quote. What is particularly striking about this photo is that it is purposefully manipulated not by the sender, the person who sent this note, but by the newspaper itself. In the original photograph, Cunard was also accompanied by her friend, John Banting, a white man. The Tribune photo was calculated to escalate racial tension. And you can see the difference. She's, the photo in the newspaper, in the Philadelphia Tribune, deliberately excludes John Banting, and it crops this particular image to show that she's friends with Black people, with African Americans, and therefore, again, scandalous. What followed is relatively well known and documented. Cunard moved from the US to Jamaica and Cuba, and finally to London, with press reports becoming increasingly hostile and racist. She filed a libel suit against the British Allied newspapers and the Empire News, Daily Dispatch, and the Sunday Chronicle, these three newspapers. She won that lawsuit, and the £1,500 that she was awarded as settlement went into the production costs of the anthology in 1934. So in a nutshell, the libel suit, which was caused by this manipulation of her image, ultimately helped her produce the Negro anthology because of the money that she received from the settlement. What is not being studied well enough is Cunard's exploitation of her image in the publicity of her cause, to raise awareness about the Scottsboro Boys Trial upon her return to London. This can be seen today by following a trail of documents that Cunard designed for celebrity events she helped organize. On 4th July 1933, Cunard organized a Scottsboro dance at First Avenue Hotel in London. And this is the announcement card. There's several events that are being announced, all to celebrate Black culture and, again, obviously the release of the Scottsboro Boys. So the dance is called Scottsboro Dance, and there's several events that are being planned. So there's dancing, there's a swimming pool, and there will be songs played by Black musicians. The announcement card shows 3 main events for the evening. As you can see, dancing, swimming pool, and all Negro numbers. The card also advertises a second event, a defense gala, for which Cunard was the honorary treasurer. She was raising money for the defense, for which she made publicity postcards proclaiming, and this is a publicity postcard, proclaiming, only the world protests have saved them so far. Cunard's appeal and hopes for a world protest show her desire to have an international audience. That was very much in line with the ethos of an international proletariat, which was ironically being advertised at upper class venues in London. And her efforts were not in vain. As expected, the events were widely reported in the press. Cunard's scandalous affairs with men of color that resulted in the press following her from one continent to another followed her here as well. Cunard's subscription to press cutting agencies, and I'm not going there, allowed her to collect press reviews not only from the US or the UK, but also from Canada, South Africa, Jamaica, and Ceylon. So these are some of the press releases, reports of Cunard's gala events in the British press, the one that we have here, and also the gala events in the foreign press. So the events that she organized were widely reported, and therefore the cause that she was advocating obviously got a lot of publicity. A look at the press reports reveals the reach of these events. The Daily Express reported that Cunard, I quote, completely and successfully defied racial prejudice last night with one of the most spectacular and curious parties that can ever have been held in this country, end quote. The conservative Daily Mail admitted that, I quote, it is unlikely that the Phoenix Theatre has ever held so cosmopolitan an audience as that which attended a special performance there last night on behalf of the Scottsboro Defense Fund, end quote. Reporting from racially segregated South Africa, the Natal Mercury was understandably hostile and quoted, I quote, a not very kind London Daily saying, I quote, Harlem with hot jazz and hot burning hearts aflame with grievance turned up at the Phoenix Theatre last night, attended by the High Priestess, Miss Nancy Cunard. And here's the catchline, free, white, and independent, end quote. It is important to note the sheer variety of media forms that Cunard found herself appropriating and appropriated by. The portraits, sculpture of her admirers, the newspaper reports that at once vilified and celebrated her, the photographs where she found herself misrepresented and remediated in a sense, and last but not the least, the commercial and publicity documents for the celebrity events that she organized or funded, including posters, postcards, and publicity booklets. The Scottsboro Boys Trial brought all of these relations to the fore. One of the more informative documents among her papers is a collection of signed appeals. This is a signature campaign that she initiated from celebrities and intellectuals for the release of the Scottsboro Boys that hail from around 1933. These signature forms carried Cunard's name and address where funds could be sent to. Among the signatories were uh, Arthur Simmons, Laura Riding, Dorothy and Ezra Pound, Samuel Beckett, Andre Gide, Rebecca West, and others. The list of signatories and their comments displays in some measure the contours of Cunard's politics. She was able to bring individuals like Beckett and Pound on exactly opposite sides of the political spectrum, not into agreement, but at a platform where she could force them to articulate their views and take sides. How far she was successful is an interesting question. So in these two forms that we have here, the first is signed by Ezra Pound and Dorothy Pound, and the second by Samuel Beckett. And Ezra Pound, of course, says a lot. We see Pound at his garrulous and hyperbolic worst, threatening, I quote, "If this sort of judicial sanction of murder and frame up continues, I should be disposed to advocate direct action," end quote. While Beckett, at his minimalist best, kept the portion blank. This entire section is blank, it just has his signature. Cunard would ultimately force 148 intellectuals to take sides during the Spanish Civil War and publish it in the form of a pamphlet in Authors Take Sides on the Spanish War in 1937, a few years later. Cunard's politics of spectacle was widely covered, reported, and as we saw, remediated. Cunard utilized her celebrity status to shape her anti-racist, anti-imperialist politics while identifying herself as a communist with all the ironies that her class identity posited. Jeremy Braddock has recently remarked, I quote, "Comprehending the individual as well as the corporate and institutional production, reception, and remediation of Cunard's image will be a way of understanding the global circulation of modernist literary cultures, the conditions of media and information, and the interactions of mass-mediated celebrity literary culture and radical race politics in the years leading up to the Second World War." Indeed, while Joyce's use of media and information in the 1920s consisted of manipulating the textual reception of his works, catering to a reading public that valued both positive and negative publicity in press notices, Cunard's savviness in understanding the new culture of celebrity of the 1930s consisted in her mastery over multiple media forms. Her commitment to an international leftist anti-racist politics meant she had to refashion her public image and exploit its mediation and remediation as it traveled across borders. Her massive archive of ready to circulate ephemera, from postcards to posters, event cards to signature forms at the Branson Center, bears this out. But I hope, as these examples show, both James Joyce, the self-exiled itinerant high modernist, and the celebrity heiress Nancy Cunard understood and exploited the media culture of an increasingly celebrity-driven era where news became inseparable from entertainment, was increasingly becoming inseparable from entertainment, I should say. From Joyce's careful selection of juicy phrases to fill out his press notices, to Cunard's organization of gala dinners, we see this very coalescing in action, this coalescing of entertainment and information. And this, I believe, makes 1922 slightly less distant from 2022. Thank you.
Thank you so
Rishira,
much, Dipanjanda. Yeah, for this wonderful talk. There was some glitches on the screen, perhaps, but that's quite expected when you were talking about Joyce and Nancy Cunard and racism. So perhaps these are kind of usual things that happened on the screen, despite having uh, all all the controls. And thank you so much. I haven't heard of Nancy Cunard. I mean, it's quite, quite new for us, I'm sure. I'm sure all of us will agree that this will open up our new possibilities for us. So I'll ask Aritra to share a few words. Yeah, on this. Yeah.
Firstly, I would like to thank Dr. Moitra for such an engaging talk. As Rishiraj has rightly pointed out, all of the information that Dr. Moitra has shared is completely new to me, and it has given me some really interesting insights on the relationship between Joyce and Cunard and the way in which she worked her way around to get that anthology about Negro writings published, which is a really good anecdote, not only for the advent of how modernism went around, but for the flourish of African American literature in general as a discipline, I believe. Uh, if I may, I would now like to ask the audience to throw their questions, comments, or observations for Dr. Moitro's talk. If you have any. In the
Right.
meantime, let me check. In the meantime, let me check if there's any on Facebook. Uh,
You can write down your questions. You can write down your questions in the chat box, perhaps, and we'll read them out, or Dr. Moitra can read it himself, or you can unmute yourself, appear on the screen, and ask Dr. Moitra if you have any questions and if you want to comment on the presentations. We got to see such wonderful uh, clippings from the press he found in the Ransom Center and in various archives that he works in. Why, yeah, while letting people ask some questions, yes, yes, you may unmute yourself. Yeah. Okay. Okay, we have one here, as you can see.
Uh, Thank you so much, Professor Lake, for your comments. It's an honor to have you in the audience because, I mean, there's you really, I mean, you don't need to introduce yourself because I use your work a lot in my chapter. So, yeah, so as you know, as you very well know, the Stein's clippings at in the Beinecke, mostly came from Romaike's clipping service. She did subscribe to a couple of other services, but mostly the the work came from Romaike's clipping bureau. So what I try and argue there is that for one thing, Romaike's name comes up in some of her works, which at times can seem off topic. For example, there is this very interesting phrase in one of her unpublished writings where she says, "I'm really touched with Romaike." In one of her plays, Romaike's name comes up as a list of guests in that play. So that kind of interested me, and I was trying to look at why that was the case, and turns out that she's referring to Romaike, just this someone who started this clipping service. One of the things I noticed is that, as you very well know, her friend Carl van Vechten also was a subscriber to clipping services, and in their correspondence, there is a lot of exchange of press clippings, reviews of their works. And Stein's collection of these press clippings, as you very well know, is really systematic. She may have been held by Alice Meticulous, but really it's in the form of these scrapbooks. So they're really systematic. They're arranged. They're organized in a sequentially and so on. What interests me is that, as you have shown in your book, for instance, Stein's name traveled from one section of the newspaper to another. She was at Times Entertainment. Her Steinese was copied and was used to have just make comments about politics, sports, and so on. And what I'm trying to argue in that in my chapter is that the clipping service kind of helped her track these these clippings from so many different contexts and put them together. And because she's this celebrity modernist, it's not it's completely predictable that she would be interested in clipping service, because the clipping service became primarily something that celebrities, authors who could afford the services would subscribe to. What I also find is that there is a slight proximity between, I would say, her interest in speed reading practices. As you know, her work with Bob Brown, and the Ready that they were both working on. And there's a similarity between the way speed reading is being seen in such a context, and the way speed reading was seen in the actual clipping bureau. They're very similar in that sense. So I find the fact that these practices are concurrent to be kind of fascinating, and I sort of make these connections. So yeah, that is basically what I kind of had to say. Would be really interested to know more about what you think. So yes, absolutely, yeah. It is the age of mechanical reproduction, but it's also this age of speed reading, because at this point there are these manuals on speed reading which the clipping agency subscribed to. The clipping agency, read and also trained their readers on. So yeah, it is really part of that cultural moment in that sense. Thank you for that question.
Great, thank you so much.
Yes, Hemingway, exactly. I realized that Hemingway was also someone who was interested in this because I came across some of these clippings at among Sylvia Beach's papers at Princeton, and because Sylvia Beach was close to Hemingway, they also exchanged certain documents. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that comment.
So next, may we have the question from Chris W. You can unmute yourself and ask, please.
Hear me? Well, yeah. No, just to express my gratitude. That was excellent. That was so informative, and I hadn't heard of Nancy Cunard beforehand. I had two questions. One was kind of, I hadn't realized that Nancy Cunard was so imbricated with anti-racial, anti-racist ideologies and politics at the time. And that kind of made me reflect on how far connected was she with the sort of drive in like the Harlem Renaissance. And because I'm doing a section of my PhD at the moment is looking at the Harlem Renaissance and sort of sexual liberation and the politics of gender and stuff. So it feels like she must have had quite a major impact on the Harlem Renaissance. So that was my first question, if you don't mind. The second one is, what was the role in sort of like technology and these two writers, their approach to advertising and self-promotion? And is there anything written about the technology or anything like that?
All right, thank you so much for that. So coming back to your first question, how far she was connected to the Harlem Renaissance and the Harlem Renaissance writers. So the book, the anthology, the Negro anthology, was, from what I've seen, was generally well received by intellectuals, Harlem intellectuals. She received thank you notes from, Langston Hughes. I mean, Langston Hughes, you know, and and many of these organizations. But I would say that she was, and there's been some work on this, and I was referring to Carla Kaplan's work on Miss Anne in Harlem, that she was seen largely as this kind of well-meaning but slightly naive outsider, for the most part. Today she'd probably be seen as someone with a savior complex. But she genuinely was interested in these causes, and she's dedicated her life to these questions. So I would say she was connected to most of these intellectuals. She wrote to them. She was in a relationship with Claude McKay. Claude McKay was supposed to be writing for the anthology, but he refused at the end because Cunard told him that he was not getting paid. So there's some work on that. But again, because of her politics, which was even then seen as kind of radically leftist, she had issues with some of the more leading voices. So W.B. Du Bois, for example, she includes Du Bois's work in the anthology. But when she is writing her own piece in the anthology, she is extremely critical of his views and his politics. So she has this, so I would say, again, a very complex relationship with the Harlem intellectuals in that way. And come back to your second question about technology, I think that is more difficult to answer. Joyce, as I was trying to argue, has been shown already, Joyce was interested in advertising, so he read about advertising, and really spent a lot of time collecting press reviews. Professor Lake just was referring to the clipping agency. For those who don't know, the clipping agency was really an interesting phenomenon. It was a private media monitoring agency which employed readers who were mostly women to manually speed read any, everything and anything, newsy that they would find. So they were hired. So press cutting agencies would hire readers to speed read hundreds of newspapers per day, where they would track keywords that their clients wanted them tracked, and they would mail those press cuttings to those clients for a fee. Joyce and his circle kind of subscribed to clipping agencies, as did Nancy Cunard, actually. And as a result, he amassed like over 3,000 press clippings about himself, about his work, in about at least 10 languages from 5 continents. So, and technology, therefore, if you can call it that, this new institution where with which you can surveil the press, was something that both Cunard and Joyce subscribed to, and they were both knowledgeable about these agencies, so they referred to these agencies in their correspondence, and so on. So sorry if that was a very long, elongated.
Brilliant, thank you.
Question, but,
thank you very much.
Yeah.
That was great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I didn't know about the clipping agency, so that's amazing. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, while others are forming their questions and comments, let me have this conversation rolling, if I may. Think about the clipping agencies as they were press cutting agencies. So you talked about how these press cuttings helped Joyce gain a kind of an advantage as far as advertising his own work for his own work is concerned. So did he use some of this press cutting as in various languages, including in his own works? I'm referring to Finnegan's Wake, perhaps. He used a lot of materials he jotted down or he got from other press cutting agencies. So was there a significant amount of that material going into the narrative or the content of his works, particularly Finnegan's Wake?
Well, again, there are several ways to respond to that question, because Joyce, to begin with, was an avid reader of newspapers. So if you look at his notebooks, especially his Finnegan's Wake notebooks, some of which have been annotated, there are references to all kinds of newspapers, from, again, radically leftist to even right wing. And he took notes from all of these newspapers. In fact, one of the ways in which the annotation project of, the Joyce notebooks began was when one of the leading Joyce scholars, Dr. Vincent Dean, he realized that many of these jottings, these phrases that are there in these notebooks, actually came from newspapers and news reports. So he was already doing that, even irrespective of whether he was a subscriber to an agency or not. So a lot of that goes into Finnegan's Wake. As far as the language is concerned, well, the notes from newspapers are obviously in various languages. Um, if you are looking at clippings from the clipping agency itself, I haven't come across references to or things that he borrowed from these press cuttings in any language other than English. There could be examples. I mean, I might be wrong, but so far from what I've seen, the cuttings, the news reports that he circulated, that is kind of recycled into Finnegan's Wake, they're mostly in English. The one that he got from the press clippings, and they're mostly very hostile reviews of Ulysses. And as you may know, that the character of Shen the Penman in Finnegan's Wake, especially in chapter book 1.8, a lot of the phrases come from newspapers, and those phrases are the phrases that his critics use to criticize Joyce. So it's an interesting way of responding to critics. So that's James Joyce's way.
It sounds very Dadaist. So, cut and paste, considering.
I had a question.
Yeah.
This is not directly related to your talk, but in general to the work that you have been doing. And I also wanted to ask this the last time, but I didn't get a chance. So today I have made it a point to ask this to you. How far do you think should archiving be included as a part of trained research methodology for students of literature in general?
That is the kind of question we should ask our educators, and it's difficult. It's a difficult question, because it's well for me to say that we should all be doing archival work, and when why not? Why not do more archival work? But of course, what's elided is always this question of access. It's easier for people who have access to grants, or whose universities or whose institutions sponsor such travels to do more archival work. It's as simple as that. Whereas if you're in a situation where your primary materials are in a different country, for that matter, it is very difficult to do that kind of work. So nowadays, of course, things are slightly better, because so many of these archives are being digitized, and a lot of that stuff is online. The Beinecke is a great example. The Beinecke Rare Books Library, Yale University, they have digitized a lot of their holdings. And if you request the curator, they might be able to even send you something if you don't maybe promise not to publish anything without permission. So it's easier that way, but again, it's a complex question. I would say that I have gained a lot from archival research, simply because there is always that scope for discovering something new that others may have overlooked, and so on. So it's very exciting. But again, it should be. I mean, the question needs to be asked with that realization in the background, that it's a question of access. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
What has I've always asked myself this, that how do you really, yes, see, archival work is mostly about gaining information and connection. So how do you arrive at a kind of a narrative after doing all this archival work? You know what I'm asking, right? So you, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I don't know how far I'm able to arrive at like these narratives, but sometimes the reason that is again as a nuanced question is because what the archive often gives you is something that you do not expect. So if you already have a narrative in mind when you're approaching something in the archive, that narrative is often likely to get questioned, if not refuted. So it's probably advisable to not begin with a set narrative in mind, but maybe have some set, maybe a set of questions that you kind of bring into the archive and see how those questions are answered. But you're right. I mean, it's always difficult to sort of reconstruct something, whole out of these fragmentary discoveries. And the kind of authors that I'm looking at, I mean, someone like James Joyce, his holdings are spread out really around the world. Of course, there's a massive chunk at Buffalo, but there are, of course, equally important and significant holdings at the British Library, in the National Library of Ireland, and obviously other important institutions in the US. So again, if you get to travel to each one of those archives, get to take notes, spend enough time, you get probably a more holistic picture than you would if you just looked at secondary sources. But again, what you are left with at the end, I would say, is not often the whole picture. You probably have more questions than answers at the end. So yeah, I would say that response.
So you talked about how these press clippings helped him gain a positive criticism, uh, a, a positive, a favorable one. So a few, perhaps, if you have the time to talk about how he changed his negative criticism into a positive one, into like incorporated them. Yeah.
Yeah, so as I was trying to show in my talk that Joyce was, was very clear about what he wanted in the press notices. So he would willingly, exclude words, exclude phrases which he would think, which he thought maybe were problematic. So he would really he would convert those negative commentaries into more positive ones. But structurally speaking, one of the things he did was he kept a rapport with these reviewers. For example, this is a famous case. Ford Maddox Ford, who was very well known modernist by even at that time. Joyce made Ford Maddox Ford write a review of Ulysses, and I think from what I've the correspondence is kind of explicit in saying that Ford was probably reluctant, but Joyce made him do that. So he would send letters and to influential critics, send them reviews of reviews by influential people to other influential people to see if they were interested in writing their own version of that review. So these are strategies that he utilized, and if you look at his correspondence, it's filled with those exchanges with other critics, acquaintances, friends, where he's circulating press reviews. So as a result, you see a lot of duplicates in the archive. And I think that the duplicates were useful to him because he would send the same clipping to multiple people. So that if they were able to write an important review or so. So yeah, these are things that are kind of recorded since.
That's very interesting. Okay, so yeah, Pinakida was talking about last. So your talk is just in the middle. So earlier, Pinakida was talking about how Henry Matisse did a cover for Ulysses, and that has nothing to do with Joyce's Ulysses per se. But again, he used it because Henry Matisse did it. So it helped him earn more favors. Uh, and our next talk, perhaps in January 6th, we have Jonathan Goldman talking about the celebrity culture of the modernist celebrities, or celebrity modernism, so to speak. So you were talking about this how this print culture or this culture of modernism is a kind of culture based on print network, and is a possibility of people uh, becoming celebrities through this print network. So if you uh, talk briefly about it.
Um, so again, Jonathan Goldman, someone whose work I use a lot in my dissertation, and he's someone who kind of argues, and I think kind of convincingly, that one of the first celebrities, I mean, again, Gertrude Stein is someone who could be seen to be, who's someone who could be famous or just by association. She would be with people, she would be with film stars, she would be with people who were already famous, and her association with these already famous people would make her famous again, by definition. So that is a part of celebrity culture that is really important at this point. By print networks, what I usually mean is, what I try to argue is that is really the kind of communication circuit that Robert Downton has in mind when he talks about any kind of literary production. We have this tendency to sort of valorize a single author as and their autonomy as producers of great literary work, and not necessarily see how they're already part of a larger circuit of booksellers, publishers, publicists, readers, and so on. So by network, I mean that, and I try and situate authors like James Joyce or even Stein as part of this network. And with the clipping service, which these people subscribe to, it becomes an even suddenly more extensive network where we could exchange print materials from one end of the world to another. Because the clipping agency, again, I thought I would not have worked clipping agency today, but still, the clipping agency had correspondence spread really around the world. So theoretically speaking, sitting back in Paris, James Joyce could expect to receive a clipping from the Times of India, published in, obviously published from India. So that is the kind of network I'm talking about, that enables you to have slightly, kind of unprecedented access to views about you or reviews about yourself from places you would not otherwise have, without this setup, this infrastructure. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We have another question, or Aritra, you would like to ask that?
Sure. It's by Dr. Priya Banerjee. She asks, what would you say was the main reason for Cunard not receiving much support from prominent contemporary authors in her anti-fascist initiatives?
I mean, there's a lot of work on that, actually. So there's William Maxwell's book on, it's called Old Negro, New Left. Sorry, yeah, maybe I mixed that up. But William Maxwell's book on the subject is kind of points out how the NAACP and the Communist Party, they already had a pretty fraught relationship, and Cunard herself did not see the work of the NAACP as going far enough. And she was convinced that the only way to approach this question of race and really to speak about anti-racism in any convincing manner was through a certain kind of leftist politics. And it's very explicit in her work. The way she dedicates her book, and it is pretty explicit that she is siding with a certain kind of leftist ideology, and that would have been difficult to digest for a lot of these intellectuals. Claude McKay being a classic example. McKay in a lot of his novels is really skeptical of the motives of even communism for some, to actually bring about that kind of change. So the relationship is already fraught to begin with, and Cunard did nothing to solidify these relationships. She was very clear in her stance that this is the path that she was going for, and this is what she wanted to do. And so there was no question of compromise from what I've been able to see. So, for instance, she wrote a play which is unpublished. It's in her private papers about this group of people traveling to the USSR and having this really utopic experience. Now, that is a sort of naivety that was obviously not would not have been taken very seriously by any intellectual worth their salt. So there is that issue with her work, but there is no question that she was genuinely convinced that this was the way. So yeah, this would be my response.
Thank you, Dr. Maitra, for your response to that question. Do we have any other questions? So then shall we call it a wrap? All right, then. It falls upon.
And thank you, Professor Lake, again for that comment. Yeah, I'm taking a note. Thank you so much.
It falls upon me to deliver the official vote of thanks. I would begin by thanking our guest speaker for the day, Dr. Dipanjan Maitra, who has taken time out of his very busy schedule to deliver this talk for us. It is always a pleasure to listen to you live, and I hope all of us will get this opportunity in the future once again. And I would then go on to thank our director, Professor Dr. Ashish Kumar Das, who has extended his warm support and appreciation for this lecture series and has made it possible. I would thank my colleague Rishiraj Pal for his consistent support and entire logistical background and making this entire lecture series a possibility, really, if I am to put it in one sentence. And I would also thank all the faculty members of CDOE RBU who have extended their hands of support in all academic and non-academic matters. Lastly, but definitely not the least, I would thank all the people who have joined here today, who have joined us today here live on Zoom or on Facebook. And thank you all for your very interesting questions, comments, and insights. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rishiraj and Aritra, once again for organizing this and making this possible, and all those who joined. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aritra, for this generous Thanksgiving. We are moving into the Thanksgiving week, as it were. So you're very generous with your words, and it's a pleasure to have Dr. Maitra fondly for us, Dipanjan, who has joined this lecture series, and thank you for this amazing talk. Hope to hear you again on some other occasion, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We have our next talk tomorrow offline at Center for Distance and Online Education, Rabindra Bharati University, Salt Lake campus. We will be joined by Dr. Orva Banerjee from St. Xavier's College and Dr. Amrit Sen from Bharati University tomorrow at 11:30. Thank you, Dr. Maitra. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much.